In this video, we are going to go over how to adjust the feed cycle of both a mechanical and pneumatic Mecal side feed applicator. The feeding cycle consists of the feed pole and components it is connected to move left and right. This in turn moves the strip of terminals and alters their centrality over the anvils. Keep in mind that you shouldn't need to adjust the feed cycle a lot. It should be just a small adjustment. Before proceeding, make sure you have a strip of terminals in the applicator with the friction engaged and feed a terminal over the anvils by hand cycling your press. Do not just pull or push the strip over the anvil, as doing so can place them differently compared to the press doing it. This video will go over mechanical and pneumatic applicators. Jump to the timestamp indicated here for your specific applicator. On our YouTube video page, we also have clickable timestamps for both computers and mobile devices. The tools that you will need for this process is a 4mm hex wrench and 13mm box end wrench. For a mechanical applicator, you will have two screws, one on the right side and one on the front. The side screw adjusts the feed pole's forwardmost position, also called its end position. The screw on the front adjusts the total stroke length, and by extension, its rearmost position. These two adjustments are interlinked with one another, and when you adjust one, it affects the other to a degree. To adjust this feed cycle, first you will need to set its end position. To do this, loosen the locking nut with your 13mm box end wrench while using your 4mm hex wrench to keep the screw from rotating. With the lock nut loosened, you can turn the inner screw. Turning it clockwise will move the feed pole to the left, while turning it counterclockwise will move the feed pole to the right. Again, you shouldn't need to turn the screw much. After your adjustment, make sure to tighten the lock nut down to prevent the inner screw from walking. Your goal is for the terminal to be centered over the anvils. To check, hand cycle the press to pull the next terminal over the anvils. After adjusting the end position, make sure that the feed pole moves to the proper rearmost position. Hand cycle the press so that the pole moves completely to the left and it should fall into the next hole in the terminal carrier strip. If the feed pole starts to lift out on the back of the hole, but not fully, this is also acceptable. If the feed pole is not ending in the right position, you'll want to adjust the stroke length. This is where the front screw is used by loosening and sliding it up and down. To the right of that screw, you will see a scale, going from positive 12 to negative 12. These numbers don't really mean anything beyond being a reference for adjustment. The larger numbers increase the size of the stroke length, where the smaller numbers decrease your stroke length. For example, if you're starting at negative 5, adjusting to negative 3 will have a longer stroke length, and moving to negative 8 will have a shorter stroke length. Again, your goal for this adjustment is for the feed pole to fully drop in the next hole in the carrier strip. If the feed pole starts to lift out of the back of the hole, but not completely lift out, that is also acceptable. As mentioned earlier, the side screw and front screw are mechanically interlinked, so you may have to go back and forth several times. The tools that you will need for this process is a 4mm hex wrench and 13mm box end wrench. For a pneumatic applicator, there are two screws on the left side. The upper screw adjusts the feed pole's forwardmost position, also called its end position, where the lower screw adjusts its rearmost position. These two adjustments are completely independent from one another. To adjust the feed cycle, first you will need to adjust its end position. To do so, use your 4mm hex wrench to loosen the top locking screw by about a half turn. This removes the clamping pressure on the adjustment screw, allowing you to turn it. Rotating this screw counterclockwise moves the feed pole to the right, while rotating it clockwise moves the feed pole to the left. Once you've made your adjustment, tighten the locking screw back down and verify that the feed pole is stopping at the correct location by hand cycling the press. The terminal should be centered over the anvils. Since the two adjustments are independent of each other, the rear position should not need to be adjusted. Verify that by hand cycling the press so the pole moves completely to the left and it should fall into the next hole in the terminal carrier strip. If the feed pole starts to lift out of the back of the hole, but not fully, that is also acceptable. If the feed pole is not ending in the right location, you'll want to adjust the rearmost position. First, hand cycle the press such that the feed pole moves to its rearmost position. Next, loosen the locking nut with a 13mm box end wrench while using your 4mm hex wrench to prevent the inner screw from rotating. With the lock nut loosened, you can turn the inner screw. Turning the screw clockwise will move the feed pole to the right, where turning it counterclockwise will move the feed pole to the left. After your adjustment, make sure to tighten the locking nut back down. Again, your goal for this is that the pole moves completely to the left and should fall into the next hole in the terminal carrier strip. If the feed pole starts to lift out on the back of the hole but not fully, that is also acceptable.